All right, as you can see in front of you, I've given you all a piece of paper. There is a front and a back to it. All right. And fortunately, unfortunately, whatever, when I did the back, I forgot to do a screenshot when I was running the program. But what I'd like you to do, you've got basically about 2.5 hours, is to create this interface that's shown right there in the gray. All right? And you've got your choice. Just so you know, I didn't say this in here, but you've got your choice. I showed you last week how to use that node value stuff to put messages on the side. You might find that confusing because we didn't go over it already, which is okay. But, for instance, if you put a height in here that's non-numeric, if you leave it blank or it's not a number, either put a message in here like I showed you last week or put in an alert. Does that make sense? I want you to do one or the other. All right? Same thing for the weight. But supposing you put in a valid height and a valid weight and you click Calculate BMI, it should show you the BMI in here and the status in here. We're going to use the same constants that we had before. Now, some of you, when we took the test last time, were very ingenious. Let's put it that way. All right? And what I mean by that is you realized that under 18.5 for a BMI was underweight. Between 18.5 and under 25 was, I guess it was, I don't remember what it was, but optimal weight. All right, you got it from the last test. Between 25 and under 30 was overweight, and greater than 30 was obese. So what some of you did was something like this. You created constants, which is a much cleaner way of doing it, because over time it is quite possible that the numbers that are used for this stuff could change. Not saying that they will, I'm saying they could change. So long story short, I want you to build this. I want you to build that interface. I want you to use the same BMI formula that you used before. I want these lines of output that are right here to be a label with a disabled text box, label with a disabled text box, and I want you to use those function expressions that we went over last week. So in other words, let's see if I've got it here. So if I run this, notice if I leave it empty, numeric input required. If I put in stuff that's out of range, it says that it's out of range. If I put in something that's within range, there you're underweight, there your optimal weight, there your overweight, and there you're obese. All right, now that I look at this, the way I had that set up, I should have blanked those out, but I've got to reset the form, which does that every time. Do you understand what I'm asking you to do? All right, so that's the first one. The second one, this is new, but I will tell you, you may want to do the second one first, probably easier. I called it odds and evens. Again, this right here that you see in the gray, that's your interface. It's almost the same as the last interface. All right? You will generate a random number between 1 and 100, and you will put it into that disabled text box. Then, all right, so after you click this, it'll put it in there, and let's say it's 56. No special meaning there, it just popped into my head. So it's 56. That should say even, and then that should say 1. All right, if you click it again, let's say this time you get 83. That should say odd, and then that should be a 1. Does that make sense? All right. There's really not a lot of code in this one. There's more code in the other one. I don't care which one you do first. But as it says in there, I'm telling you what to do. Generate a random number between 1 and 100. Put that number in here. That's what will happen when you click that button. Modulo the number by 2. If the result is 1, put the word odd there. If the result is even, put the word even there. And increment the appropriate counter. That's all you have to do. All right? So I'm going to give you between now and around, I'll ask around 10:30 to see where people are. And at that time, then I will go over how I did it. All right? And it's not going to be that different from what you're going to have on the test tomorrow. All right? Questions? All right. All right, I am going to go over this and show you the way I did it. Again, that's not necessarily the way you did it. I'm not necessarily saying it's the best way to do it. I'm saying it's the way that I did it. So, first of all, I'm asking this question. Am I right in assuming that everyone knows how to make this form? All right, because if you don't, that's problematic. Then you're going to have to email me or see me before class or see me after class, because that's stuff that we have gone over and you should understand that. All right. You also should be to the point, really, forgetting about that asterisk there, but you should be able to add the necessary CSS to make it look pretty much the way that it does. All right. So just to show you, and I don't want to waste time on that, but this was my, I have about 35, 40 lines of CSS. And much of this stuff here, all that was just to push it over so it wasn't leaning against the left-hand corner. That's all. And then I did a little bit of work to make my text boxes all the same size, my buttons all the same size. All right. I don't even think I used this one. I don't remember if I did or not. That span, I just wanted it to stand out, so I wanted to make sure that everything was red in color and bold. All right. And this, again, was just done for some spacing. So, all right. So again, this is the way that I created, and it's very similar to what we went over the other day. Like I said, I don't want to spend more than a minute or two on this. All right. You'll notice that every single field that is in here that I want to potentially manipulate arithmetically will have an ID. So the height has an ID, the weight has an ID, the calculate button has an ID, the reset button has an ID, the actual word BMI, where we're going to put the BMI, has an ID, and the status has an ID. Any questions about that? Yes.
When you're doing this, what's the difference between the for and the ID?
What the for does is for a label. What it says is if you are running the program and you click on the label, it'll put your cursor inside of the text box. All that is that's basically done as an accessibility tool to make it a little easier. All right. But what it's saying is this label is for weight. So the system goes and it says, okay, something in there has got to have an ID of weight. And that's what it grabbed. All right. Then I've got my line where I'm just adding the calculator right here. All right. So let's look at the JavaScript. Again, I did a use strict at the top. I will tell you this, you may laugh, you may not laugh, I don't know, I don't really care, but I learned yesterday never to work on this while I'm watching the Packers lose. Okay, it was not a good thing, and it was on one of these lines of code, I don't even remember which one it was, but I left the $sign off. For some reason, I just couldn't see that I'd left the $sign off, and I was getting really upset. So, All right, so I've got minimum height, maximum height, minimum weight, maximum weight, and then these three that I told you about earlier. 18.5, 25.0, and 30.0. Some of you use these in your first test. Some of you use these. All right? Anybody have any questions over what any of those mean? Again, this is that, for lack of better words, I've been calling it that aliasing function. We put that function in there so that we're able to use the $ as opposed to having to type in document.getElementById. That's it. That's the job of it. Now, what happens is, I'm going to whip down to the bottom for a second. When you click the calculate button, this is telling it to call the process entries function. When you click the reset button, that's telling you to call the reset the form function. Do those make sense? Again, I said that's kind of registering it. That's not really the right term. It's just the one I use. So we come in here to process. So what are we doing? This should make sense to you. These two lines of code should make sense to everybody in here. What we're saying is grab whatever value somebody put into this text box and this text box right here, each of the text boxes, and put them into local variables, or variables called weight, height, and weight. Does that make sense? All right. This is just a Boolean flag that I'm going to use. I'm going to suppose all my input is good. And if I find out that anything was bad, I'm going to set that to false. Quite often when you work with Boolean variables, you either start it with valid or is. You know, is married, is union member, etc. All right? But a lot of times too with valid, you know, if you're doing validation like this, I could have, instead of calling it valid input, I could have just called it is valid. Would have worked just fine. All right. So what are we doing here? Well, first of all, if you look, these are 100% exactly the same thing, except in lines 21 through 30, it says height, and in lines 32 to 41, it says weight. Does that make sense to everybody? We're basically doing the same kinds of things, except for height, we're guaranteeing that it's between 12 and 96, and for weight, we're guaranteeing it's between 1 and 777. So, if it's not numeric, all right, when I went over this with you last week, I just made a check where I combined this condition together with these two conditions. And again, I've said this kind of thing to you before. This isn't meant to be funny. It isn't funny. You can only account so much for people just either not caring or not being able to run a program. All right? But I come in here and I say, hey, if it's not numeric, what we want to do, this is grabbing, remember what this is doing right here. If you don't want to do that tomorrow on your test, that's where you're going to put an alert. All right? But what that is doing right there, that line that you see there, line 23, that line is saying, change this asterisk that you see right here. Change that asterisk right there so that instead of being an asterisk, it now says numeric input required. All right? Now, if it gets down to here, and again, this is stuff that just has to start clicking with you. If I get down to line 26, what do I know? I know I had numeric input. I don't know if it's within range, but I know it's numeric input. So now I'm validating my numeric input to see if that's within range. So if this is less than 12 or it's greater than 96, then we change that message that you see right here from an asterisk to height input out of range. All right, I guess I probably could have put, you know, in parentheses there what the range was. Okay? But if either it was non-numeric or it was out of range. If either one of those are true, notice how valid input is set to false. Even if it was already set to false, up here, and down here, it doesn't matter. So the light's on. So I hit the switch again, type of an idea. So this is exactly the same right here. This is exactly the same as the other one, except that instead of checking on height, it's checking on weight. Questions on that? So if I get down to here, remember that's just a shortcut for saying if valid input equal true. So if it's not true, I'm not doing anything. But if it is true, I'm calling calculate BMI. And since I defined in this routine height and weight, that's what I'm passing to that routine, our height and weight. Now, just so you know, I've probably given you these terms before. I may not have. But this here says height, this here says weight, and here it says height and weight. Those are referred to as actual parameters. That's their actual name. All right? I remember when my wife and I, when we purchased our house, she's so used to signing her name Sandy Scott that I saw her do it on the first one, and I said, I don't think that's right. And the guy looked at it and he goes, well, what's your real name? She said, Sandra K. Scott. She said, that's your actual name. That's what you should use when you're signing this. All right? If they didn't care, like down here, notice we called it H and W. Those are called formal parameters. They do not have to be the same name as the actual parameter. They can be the same name. They don't have to be the same name. And I've given you examples like this before, where I've written something like this. So let's say that we just write a function, and we just call it add2. And we call it here n1 and n2. And all we do here is we return n1 plus n2. All right? Now, up above in my programs, way up higher, I say var n1 equals 17. Var n2 equals 23. Var sum equals add 2, n1, n2. Totally legit, correct? And what that'll do is sum will now hold 40. But what if I decide after that I want var A equals 26, var B equals 23, var C equals add 2, A, B. Some people, so in this case, here and here, my actual parameters are the same name as my formal parameters. Here and here, they're different names. Most people do not name their actual parameters and their formal parameters the same thing. Because one of the reasons that you write functions is so that you can call them multiple times. All right. So we get down here. This becomes really easy. Here's the BMI, and that's the same. There's nothing new there, except I did the 2 fixed right there. All right? And then this, do you all understand? I'm asking you this question. That line that you see, line 51. Do you all understand that what that line says is, hey, I've calculated a BMI, stick it right there. Does that make sense? Because that's exactly what we're doing. And then, rather than calling it from up here, well, I've already got my BMI value. It's local here, so I just pass it to calculate BMI status. Now, this says if it's less than max under. That means if it's less than 18.5, you're considered underweight. Otherwise, if it's less than 25, you're considered optimal weight. Otherwise, if it's less than 30, you're overweight, otherwise you're obese. That, in my humble opinion, that is the simplest way that you can write that code. All right? And when I say simple, I don't just mean simple, but I mean simple and straightforward. Again, I've said this to you on more than one occasion. You should be trying to write code that makes sense to you. You have plenty of time. If your goal is to become a programmer, you have plenty of time to sit there and learn how to write really. There actually is a word for it. It's called obfuscate. When you write code that only you can understand. I have worked with people like that. All right? I'll give you stories. I'm not going to, but I've worked with plenty of people like that. All right? And what this is doing right here, this line says, okay, S is, and S is just S for status. Could have called it anything. It's either underweight, optimal weight, overweight, or obese. This line right here, line 75, that says, whatever based on that BMI, whatever I figured out the status to be, put it right there. Does that make sense? And then, this is, what are we doing here? These are clearing out all four of the text boxes. So my height text box, my weight text box, my BMI text box, and my BMI status text box. Also, when you look on the screen here, notice how those two are gray. I should not be able to go in and manually monkey with these. All right? If I could, if I was, I'm not yet, but if I was 333 pounds, I could say, that's optimal. The day may come when the world we live in, that might become optimal. I don't know. And then what are these doing? These are putting those asterisks back again. And then this one, just putting the cursor when I start, after I click the reset button, boom, the cursor goes to the height. And then finally, again, what are we doing here? Again, we are setting so when it starts, when we reset the form that the cursor goes to the height, these are registering those two functions. Line 89 says, when I click the calculate button, call process entries. When I click, line 90 says, when I click the reset button, call reset the form. Are there any questions on this? Is there anything that doesn't make sense? This is your time to ask. This up here, I set S. I set S to either underweight, optimal weight, overweight, or obese, and that line right there says the dot value says. Well, remember what this says. It says get element by ID. So find an element by ID that's BMI status. So it looks back in here, and there it is. At the bottom of the screen, that's the last text box. Okay. Now the good news is, my opinion, the other one was even easier to do. All right? Because if you look at the other one, now one thing that's on here or not on here, I could have done this, but I didn't make you keep track of how many of each one there were. You could have added that or whatever. It wouldn't have been that hard to do. All right? But I just didn't do it. But tomorrow, when you take your test, if 1, 2, all of them, whatever, of those problems say use function expressions, that means that you are to write code that looks like this. That is that is a function expression right there. All right? So let's look at the other one. And with this one, the actual code to do anything was unbelievably small. All right? Why? Well, you have to generate something here. Then I told you what you had to do. You take the number you generated and you modulo it by 2. If it's equal to 1, right there you put odd. If it's equal to 0, you put even. If you put odd there, you add 1 to this. If you put even there, you add 1 to that. That's all there was to it. So whereas the other one had, I think, about 90 lines, something like that, this one has less than 50. All right? So I used the same CSS file for both. I didn't see any reason why I couldn't. All right? And here's where I set it up. The only thing I didn't like about the way that I wrote this, does anybody remember what that stands for? NBSP? Non-breaking space. I was forcing spaces in there, and the reason that I did that was if I didn't, okay, this was pushed over to the left, and it looked kind of to me. The problem that you can run into is when you get people who do this kind of stuff, you know, you may be able to actually set it up so it would look bad on a screen. All right? All right. So as far as the code, again, use strict. I only had two I made these global, so I didn't have to pass them. Now, was that a good thing to do? Maybe not. And actually, I probably could have just put them in one of the routines. It wouldn't have mattered. Again, I've got my alias right here. Here's my process entry. That doesn't show very well. That's not an M. That's RN for random number. So line 13 says var RN equals 0. It's not the letter M. Sorry, I just decided to call it RN, and then I looked at it later. I thought, well, that's really hard. That's really hard to read. All right. This is saying, okay, I called it on my form random number. Blank that out. Blank out the status. Then create a brand new random number, and create that brand new random number I just created. Stick it back into here. So those 4 lines of code say blank this out, create a brand new random number between 1 and 100, and stick that number in here. That's it. All right? Then I call the function to determine whether or not it's odd or even. And I told you what that was. I gave you that pseudocode or English down below the picture. So var odd even equals, and again I passed in the random number. So again, determine. Modulo it by 2. This is res, just short for result. So take the random number and modulo it by 2. If the result is 1, I want to add 1 to my odds, and I want to put the word odd. So that line right there, line 33, will put the word odd right here. And it'll add 1 to whatever's here. All right? If it's a 0, same kind of thing, but it'll put the word even here, and it'll add 1 to that counter. All right? And this is just making sure whatever my total odds is right there, whatever my total odds variable is right there, that's copying it here. And the next line is saying whatever my total evens counter is, take that and copy it to here. All right? And there's not much registering to do because I only have the one function here, the process entries, that calls another function, odd or even. Now, I'm not claiming, isn't this a fantastic program? It's functional. That's what I'm looking for right now, is for your programs to be functional. All right? The other thing is I did go over, and I appreciated the comments, pro, con, whatever, on those evaluations last week. For whatever reason, some of you either chose not to do it, or you gave me the blank one, or whatever, but out of the 12 people who were here, I only got 9 of them. All right? But I'd rather have 9 than 8, or than 0, or whatever. All right? Now, as far as addressing some of the stuff that was said. All right, and again, I don't know who said it. That stuff is gone. So even though Devin said, you can find out who, I don't care who wrote it. I really don't. But a couple people put down, I don't think we did a good enough job of going over Bootstrap, which may be true. So we're going to fix that next week. What we're going to do, just so you know, what we're going to do tomorrow is we're taking the test. Wednesday, we're going over 6 and 7. Boom, we're done with the JavaScript part of the class then. Not the jQuery, which we'll do next, but the JavaScript. All right? And we'll go over chapters 6 and 7, all right, on Wednesday. Thursday, we'll probably go over another example as a class like we've been doing. Friday, all right, we will be taking the 2 written tests, the one for 6 or whatever, 6 and 7 or whatever the heck they are. Next week, remember we're off a week from today. No class next Monday. All right? So next Tuesday, probably Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, we're going to do a project. We're going to take and build an entire website from scratch. We're going to do everything. We're going to, if you haven't already downloaded it, I'm going to have you download the wireframing tool. We're going to make basically a sketch of what it's going to look like. All right? And we're going to take it from nothing to everything and have it done. All right? And I'm hoping we can do that in 2 days. And if we can, then the third day, we're going to take it and make it into a Bootstrap application. Now, if there's more I can do than that, I don't know what it is. All right? For those of you who wrote down, well, what I want you to do is I want you to do an assignment or to do a problem in class and then basically give us almost that same problem for a test. That's kind of what we're doing. All right? So if I haven't addressed your concerns, okay, then then let me know. How's that? Any questions on either one of these 2 problems? All right, so when you come in here tomorrow, there will be 3 problems on the test. One of them will, 2 of the 3 will be very similar to this, what we've just done. And I'm going to go and I'm going to put up an example. I'm going to create something pretty simple, and I'm going to throw somewhere between 5 and 10 errors in it. Some will be syntax, some will be logic, some will be runtime. And there'll either be 5 errors at 3 points apiece or 10 errors at 2 points apiece. I don't know. I didn't write the test yet. All right, I'll be doing that probably this evening. Okay? All right. Like I said, that was it. Unless anybody else has any other questions, that's all that I had.